The mid-20th century in the United States was a time of monumental social and political change. It was an era where the nation grappled with its ideals of freedom, equality, and justice, particularly for its black citizens. The Civil Rights Movement, which began in the 1950s and gained momentum throughout the 1960s, was not just a political struggle, but a cultural and moral battle that changed the very fabric of American society. The roots of injustice. To understand the Civil Rights Movement, it is crucial to recognize the deeply rooted system of racial injustice that existed in the United States long before the 1950s. Slavery had been a defining feature of American life until the Civil War, which ended in 1865 with the emancipation of millions of African Americans. However, the end of slavery did not mean the end of racial discrimination. In fact, the post-war period saw the rise of new forms of institutionalized racism, particularly through the Black Codes and Jim Crow laws in the South, which enforced segregation and disenfranchised African Americans. These laws legalized the separation of races in schools, public places, transportation, and even housing. The social fabric of the South was designed to keep Black Americans subjugated to white supremacy. At the same time, the North was not free from racial prejudice, though the situation was different. African Americans in the North faced less legal segregation, but were still subjected to discrimination in housing, employment, and education. By the 20th century, African Americans had begun to rise up against the oppression they faced, forming organizations like the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, in 1909 to challenge racial inequality. Yet, it wasn't until the 1950s that the Civil Rights Movement gained significant traction. The Spark Brown v. Board of Education, 1954. In 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a landmark decision in the case of Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka. The court ruled that separate but equal public schooling for Black and white students was unconstitutional, declaring that segregation in public schools violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. This decision was a major blow to the Jim Crow system and ignited a new wave of activism across the country. The ruling in Brown provided the legal foundation for future challenges to racial segregation. However, its implementation was met with fierce resistance, especially in the South. In many instances, local governments and schools defied the court's order, and the federal government had to intervene to ensure compliance. The rise of the movement. Though legal victories like Brown were a starting point, the Civil Rights Movement was about more than court rulings. It was about changing hearts and minds, and it required people willing to take action, often at great personal risk. In December 1955, Rosa Parks, a Black woman, made history when she refused to give up her seat to a white man on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Her arrest sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, led by a young pastor named Martin Luther King Jr. The boycott lasted for over a year, during which time African Americans in Montgomery refused to use the bus system. The economic impact of the boycott, combined with the determined leadership of King and other activists, ultimately led to a Supreme Court decision declaring segregation on public buses unconstitutional. The success of the Montgomery bus boycott demonstrated the power of peaceful resistance and nonviolent protest. It was a model that would be adopted by activists throughout the country, and Martin Luther King Jr. emerged as the most prominent voice of the movement. Nonviolent resistance, the philosophy of Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. believed that nonviolence was the most powerful tool for achieving social change. Drawing on the principles of Mahatma Gandhi's nonviolent resistance in India, King argued that the power of love and peaceful protest could break the chains of oppression and hatred. King's philosophy was not just about avoiding physical violence, but also about cultivating a moral courage that could withstand the brutal attacks of segregationists. He believed that by turning the other cheek in the face of violence, the moral high ground would ultimately win the day. His speeches and writings resonated with millions of African Americans and inspired individuals of all races to join the struggle for equality.